I clutched the steering wheel tighter as I turned onto our street, my heart racing with anticipation. 8 months away felt like an eternity. The familiar curve of the driveway, the old oak tree we'd promised to hang a swing from someday. Everything looked exactly the same, yet somehow different through the lens of homesickness finally being cured. As I killed the engine, I caught a glimpse of movement through the living room window. Amelia. My chest tightened at the thought of holding her again. I barely had time to grab my suitcase before the front door flew open and she raced down the steps, her dark hair streaming behind her like a banner. "Mason," she cried, launching herself into my arms. I dropped the suitcase, catching her midair, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo as I buried my face in her neck. "God, I missed you," I whispered, feeling her tremble slightly against me. 8 months is entirely too long, she replied, pulling back to look at me, her fingers tracing my face as if memorizing it anew. Something flickered across her features, a shadow I couldn't quite place. But it vanished so quickly I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Inside, Amelia had transformed our dining room. Candles flickered on the table set with our wedding china, and the rich aroma of my favorite rosemary lamb filled the house. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," I said, though secretly I was touched by the gesture. The triumphant return of the master builder deserves a proper celebration. She handed me a glass of wine, her fingers lingering against mine. "To the Dubai Tower, and its brilliant structural engineer." We clinked glasses and for a moment, I saw a flash of something in her eyes again. Tension, perhaps? "Worry? Everything okay?" I asked. "Perfect," she answered too quickly. "Just adjusting to having you back. The house has been so quiet." Over dinner, I regaled her with stories of the project. The impossible deadlines, the eccentric billionaire client, the challenges of building a structure that seemed to defy physics. "And what about you?" I asked, reaching for her hand across the table. "You've been vague in our calls lately. How's the gallery? How's Luna and that husband of hers? Jacob?" Amelia's smile tightened at the mention of her sister and brother-in-law. "The gallery's fine. Luna and Jacob are the same." The way she said it told me everything I needed to know. My relationship with Jacob had been strained ever since I'd refused to invest in one of his questionable business ventures. "We should think about our future now that I'm back," I said, deliberately changing the subject. "I was thinking in Dubai. Maybe it's time we started trying for a family of our own." Her fork clattered against the plate. "Mason, she stopped, composed herself. "There's actually something important we should talk about, but not tonight. Tonight is just for us." She reached for the wine bottle, refilling our glasses with hands that weren't quite steady. Later that night, I woke alone in our bed. The clock read 3:17. Rubbing my eyes, I called Amelia's name softly, but received no answer. A thin band of light shone from beneath the bathroom door. I knocked gently. "Amelia?" The sound of frantic movement came from inside, followed by what sounded distinctly like paper tearing. When she opened the door, her eyes were rimmed with red. "What's wrong?" I asked, reaching for her. "Nothing," she said, slipping past me back to bed. "Just emotional about having you home." But as she passed, I caught sight of crumpled paper in her hand, which she quickly shoved under her pillow. "What's that?" I asked. "Nothing important," she said too brightly. "Just a welcome home card I was working on." Silly to be crying over it, I know. As I held her that night, feeling her finally fall into restless sleep against my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship during my absence. Something she wasn't ready to share. The next morning over breakfast, Amelia seemed more herself, laughing at my jokes about Dubai's oppressive heat as she poured coffee. "I've invited my parents for dinner tomorrow," she announced suddenly. "And Luna and Jacob too." The spoonful of cereal paused halfway to my mouth. "Your family? All at once? What's the occasion?" She avoided my eyes, busying herself with wiping an imaginary spill. "No occasion. They've missed you too." The knot of unease in my stomach tightened. In our 5 years of marriage, I'd learned to read the signs. Amelia was hiding something, and whatever it was, her family was involved. "Is this about that important talk you mentioned last night?" I asked. She hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. "Yes. But it's nothing bad, I promise. Just complicated." I wanted to press further, but the pleading look in her eyes stopped me. Whatever storm was brewing, I would face it tomorrow. Little did I know that within 24 hours, the life we'd built together would begin collapsing like a house of cards. The following evening, I stood in our kitchen, watching Amelia fuss over the appetizer arrangement with unusual intensity. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted a piece of cheese for the fourth time. "It's just your family, not the Dubai client," I joked, trying to ease her obvious tension. She didn't laugh. "I want everything to be perfect." She smoothed her dress, a dark blue number I'd always loved, and glanced at the clock again. "They'll be here any minute." I stepped behind her, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. "Are you going to tell me what this is really about? You've been on edge since I got home." She turned, pressing her forehead against my chest. "It's complicated, Mason. Please just be open-minded tonight." Before I could press further, the doorbell rang. Amelia practically jumped out of her skin. "I'll get it," I said, squeezing her hand reassuringly before walking to the door. Amelia's parents, Robert and Diana, greeted me with the usual mixture of polite affection and subtle assessment. Robert's handshake was firm but brief, while Diana offered her cheek for the obligatory kiss. "The prodigal son-in-law returns," Robert said with a tight smile. "How was Dubai? Building castles in the sand?" "Something like that," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. "The project came in under budget and ahead of schedule." Diana patted my arm. "We've been looking after Amelia while you were gallivanting around the globe." I bit back a retort. My work wasn't gallivanting, it was what kept us in this house they so clearly approved of. Luna and Jacob arrived 15 minutes later. Luna, Amelia's younger sister, embraced me warmly enough, though her eyes held the same strange intensity I'd been seeing in Amelia's. Jacob's greeting was stiff, hardly surprising given our history. Throughout dinner, I felt like I was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me. Conversations about the weather, local politics, and my time in Dubai felt forced, punctuated by meaningful glances between the others. When Amelia brought out dessert, a cheesecake that had taken her hours that morning, Luna cleared her throat and looked at Jacob. "We actually have an announcement," she said, reaching for her husband's hand. The table fell silent, but not with surprise. Everyone but me seemed to be holding their breath in anticipation. "Jacob and I want to start a family," Luna continued, her voice wavering slightly. "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased despite my reservations about Jacob. "Congratulations." Luna's smile faltered. "Well, that's the thing. We can't. Not the traditional way, at least." Jacob took over, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Luna's medical condition makes carrying a pregnancy dangerous for her." I nodded slowly, beginning to sense where this was heading. A cold feeling spread through my chest. "We've explored all the options," Luna continued, "and we believe we've found the perfect solution." She turned to Amelia, who was staring fixedly at her plate. "We've asked Amelia to be our surrogate." The room blurred at the edges. I looked at my wife, waiting for her to meet my eyes, to explain that she'd obviously declined this absurd request. But she wouldn't look at me. "And I've agreed," Amelia said softly, finally raising her gaze to meet mine. "I want to do this for my sister." "When?" I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "When exactly did you make this decision?" The silence that followed was deafening. "About 2 months ago," Luna answered when it became clear Amelia wouldn't. "While you were away." 2 months. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Amelia agreed to carry someone else's child without discussing it with me, but she'd kept it from me for 2 months. "The procedure is scheduled for next Tuesday," Jacob added, as casually as if discussing a dinner reservation. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Amelia, can I speak with you in the kitchen?" "Now." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the dining room, my mind racing. Behind me, I heard Robert mutter something about selfish reactions, and Diana shushing him. In the kitchen, I braced myself against the counter, trying to process the betrayal I felt. Amelia entered a moment later, closing the door behind her. "You made this life-altering decision without me?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Without even mentioning it during our calls?" "I knew you'd react like this," she whispered. "I wanted to tell you in person, not over a laggy video call halfway around the world. There's a vast difference between waiting to discuss something and proceeding as if you've already got my blessing," I said. "Tuesday? Seriously?" A soft knock interrupted us. Diana poked her head in, her expression a practiced mask of concern. "Everything all right in here?" "Robert and I thought perhaps we should have a word with Mason." Before I could protest, they had entered, closing the door behind them. Robert stood with his arms crossed, while Diana put her hand on my arm. "Mason dear," she said, her voice honeyed with false sympathy, "I understand this is a shock, but think about what this means to Luna. After everything she's been through." I pulled away from her touch. "This isn't about Luna." This is about my wife making decisions about our life, our future, without me. Robert's eyes narrowed. Sometimes we need to rise above our selfish instincts for family. As I looked between them, suddenly everything clicked into place. The mysterious letter, Amelia's anxiety, the rushed dinner. This wasn't just about surrogacy, there was something more they weren't telling me. After Diana and Robert finally left the kitchen, I stood there looking at my wife as if seeing her for the first time. Outside, I could hear Luna's nervous laughter as she and Jacob chatted with her parents in our living room, acting as if their bombshell hadn't just detonated my marriage. "How much are they paying you?" I asked quietly. Amelia's eyes widened. "What? You heard me. This isn't just about sisterly love, is it? There's money involved." Her cheeks flushed. "That's not fair, Mason. What's not fair is coming home to discover my wife has agreed to carry someone else's child without so much as a text message to her husband." I ran my hands through my hair. "So I'll ask again, how much?" She looked away. "Jacob offered 40,000. The room seemed to tilt. "You're telling me you agreed to sell your body, our future, for $40,000? "It's not selling," she hissed. "It's compensation for the medical procedures, the time off work, the physical toll." "Did it ever occur to you that I might have concerns? That I might not want to watch my wife carry another man's child? That I might have wanted us to start our own family first?" Her expression hardened. "My body, my choice, Mason. Our marriage, our decision," I countered. "Or at least it should have been." I moved past her to the trash can, lifting the lid to throw away my napkin. Something caught my eye, shredded paper with official letterhead. I fished out a piece, recognizing the logo of a collection agency. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the fragment. Amelia snatched it from my hand. "Nothing. Junk mail." But I'd seen enough to connect the dots. Is Jacob in financial trouble? Is that what this is really about? Before she could answer, Luna appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here? We're thinking of opening another bottle of wine." The look that passed between the sisters spoke volumes. "Actually," I said, "I think it's time for everyone to leave." Luna's mouth fell open. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. We need some privacy. My wife and I have a lot to discuss." Luna stormed back to the living room. I heard her whispering urgently to Jacob and her parents. Within minutes, they were gathering their coats, throwing cold looks in my direction. As they left, Jacob paused at the door. "Think about what you're doing, Mason," he said, his voice low. "Luna and I really need this." I stared at him, seeing beyond his practiced sincerity to the desperation beneath. "I bet you do," I replied. After they left, Amelia and I faced each other across the living room. She looked simultaneously defensive and guilty. "There's more to this than you're telling me," I said. "I deserve the truth, all of it." She sank onto the couch, shoulders slumping. "Luna and I went to see a lawyer. There's already a preliminary agreement signed." Each word felt like another betrayal. "You signed legal documents about this?" She nodded miserably. "It was just preliminary. Nothing's final without your knowledge." "Really? Because it sounds pretty final to me." "The procedure is scheduled for next week." "I was going to tell you as soon as you got home," she insisted. "I just wanted one night of normalcy first." I paced the room trying to process everything. Why would Jacob offer so much money? Where is it coming from? The man who tried to get me to invest in his pyramid scheme suddenly has 40,000 to spare. "It's not just from him," Amelia admitted. "He received an investment from a business partner." "What business partner?" "Jacob can hardly keep a job, let alone run a business." She looked away. "Someone named Ricardo. I've never met him." A memory surfaced, Jacob at our wedding, slipping away to take a call, returning nervous and sweating. Does Ricardo have anything to do with Jacob's gambling problem? Her head snapped up. What gambling problem? So she didn't know everything after all. I sat across from her. "Amelia, listen to me. If you go through with this, our marriage is over." "That's not a threat, it's a fact. I cannot stay with someone who would make this kind of decision without me." "You can't dictate what I do with my body," she shouted, jumping to her feet. "This is my choice." "Yes, it is," I agreed, my voice deadly calm. "And choices have consequences. You choose surrogacy with your sister. You choose a life without me. You're being unreasonable. People act as surrogates all the time. With their spouse's knowledge and support. With proper vetting of the intended parents. With clear boundaries and agreements." I shook my head. "None of that happened here." Her eyes filled with tears. "I promised, Luna. And you promised me fidelity and honesty when we married. Which promise matters more? She didn't answer. I grabbed my keys and wallet. Where are you going? She asked, panic edging into her voice. To a hotel. I need space to think. Mason, please? Give me a reason to stay, Amelia. Tell me you'll call them tomorrow and back out. She looked away, tears streaming down her face. That's what I thought, I said, opening the front door. I'll be back tomorrow to get some clothes. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is bigger than you realize. Be careful. I looked back at our house, wondering who else was involved in this web of secrets and lies. The hotel room felt sterile and empty, much like my thoughts as I stared at the ceiling that night. Sleep evaded me. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Amelia, alternating between anger and pleas for understanding. I turned it off around midnight. In the morning, I made a decision. If Jacob and Luna were pulling Amelia into something dangerous, I needed to know exactly what we were dealing with. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Eric Morales had been a classmate in college who'd gone into private investigation after a brief stint with the police. We'd kept in touch over the years, and I'd even helped design his office building when he started his own firm. Mason Voff, he answered on the second ring. Dubai man returns. What can I do for you? I explained the situation as concisely as possible. So you want me to look into this Jacob guy and his mysterious benefactor? Eric asked when I finished. And Luna too, I added. Something doesn't add up. I'll see what I can find. Send me their full names and whatever personal details you have. After hanging up, I showered and drove back to the house to collect some clothes. I half expected Amelia to be waiting, but the house was empty. A note on the counter informed me she'd gone to a pre-procedure consultation with Luna. I packed efficiently, taking just what I needed for a week. As I zipped my bag, something compelled me to check our home office. Amelia had always handled our finances, keeping meticulous records in a filing cabinet. I pulled open the drawer marked bank statements and began to leaf through recent months. My blood ran cold when I saw a withdrawal for $15,000 2 weeks ago, labeled simply medical. Another withdrawal for $5,000 had been made just 3 days before my return. I checked our savings account statement next. Another $10,000 gone with the notation loan to Luna. I was photographing these statements when my phone rang. Eric. That was fast, I said. Your boy Jacob isn't hard to track, Eric replied, his voice grim. He's got gambling debts up to his eyeballs. Owes at least 80 grand to some very unpleasant people. 80,000? How is that possible? Started with sports betting, graduated to high-stakes poker. Been trying to dig himself out with increasingly desperate business ventures, all failures. I thought of the 40,000 Amelia mentioned. What about his business partner, Ricardo? Eric's laugh was humorless. Ricardo Velasquez isn't anyone's business partner. He's a loan shark with ties to organized crime. Word is he's branching out into money laundering ventures. My mouth went dry. And Luna? Pause. That's the interesting part. I've got a contact who works at the Regal Casino. Says Luna's there almost as often as Jacob, but they rarely acknowledge each other inside. And get this, she's been seen getting pretty cozy with none other than Ricardo Velasquez himself. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying Luna and Ricardo? Can't confirm yet, but it sure looks that way. I'll keep digging. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Was it possible that Luna was having an affair with the very loan shark her husband was indebted to? And where did the surrogacy fit into all this? I needed more information. I found Jacob's ex-wife on social media and sent her a message, explaining that I needed to speak with her about an urgent family matter. To my surprise, she called within the hour. I've been waiting for this call for years, Melissa said after I introduced myself. I knew eventually someone in your family would figure out what kind of man you're dealing with. What can you tell me about him? Jacob is a con artist, always has been. He targeted me because my father was wealthy. When Dad cut me off for marrying him, Jacob filed for divorce the next month. She paused. But that's not the worst of it. During our marriage, he convinced me to take out loans in my name for his business ideas. Left me with $90,000 in debt. Did he gamble when you were together? Constantly. He'd disappear for days, come back either flush with cash or begging me to bail him out. What about Luna? How long have they been together? They started seeing each other while we were still married. She knew he was married, didn't care. They deserve each other, if you ask me. We talked for another 20 minutes, with Melissa painting a damning picture of Jacob as a manipulative user who saw relationships as opportunities for financial gain. After thanking her, I drove to a coffee shop to process everything I'd learned. I was so absorbed in thought that I almost missed the text from Eric. Found something big. Can you meet now? I replied yes immediately, and he sent an address for a park nearby. 20 minutes later, I spotted him sitting on a bench, looking around cautiously. Why all the cloak and dagger? I asked as I sat beside him. He handed me a manila envelope. Because Ricardo Velasquez isn't someone you want to mess with. These guys find out I'm investigating them, things could get ugly. Inside the envelope were photos. Luna entering a hotel, followed by an expensively dressed man Eric identified as Ricardo. Another photo showed Amelia meeting Luna at a bank. The last was a document, a receipt for a cashier's check for $50,000 made out to Amelia, signed by Luna. That's $10,000 more than she told me about, I muttered. Eric nodded grimly. And noticed the date? The day before she went to the fertility clinic for her first screening. As pieces fell into place, my phone buzzed with a message from Amelia. It's done. First procedure complete. Please come home so we can talk. I stared at Amelia's text until the screen went dark. It's done. 3 days after my return, and the procedure was already complete. There was no clearer message that my feelings on the matter were irrelevant to her. I drove home anyway, hoping against hope that she might finally be ready for an honest conversation. The house was dark when I arrived, with only the porch light glowing. Inside, I found a note on the kitchen counter. Staying at my parents' tonight. Need space to process your reaction. We'll call tomorrow. The cowardice of it ignited my anger anew. She had made a life-altering decision without me, gone through with a medical procedure against my explicit wishes, and now she needed space for my reaction? I pulled out my phone to call her, but a text from an unknown number stopped me cold. You should stop digging into Velasquez's business. Some warnings only come once. My pulse quickened. I took screenshots of the message, then deleted it from my phone. Someone was watching me and they knew I was investigating Ricardo. The only people who knew were Eric and potentially Jacob or Luna if they'd been tipped off. I called Eric immediately. You get a threatening text too? He asked without preamble. Just now. How did they know? These people have eyes everywhere, Eric said, his voice tense. Listen, Mason, this is escalating faster than I expected. I think you should meet with Camila Navarro. She's an attorney who specializes in complicated divorces, especially ones with potential criminal elements. Divorce. The word caught in my throat. Despite everything, I hadn't fully accepted that our marriage might be over. Just a consultation, Eric said gently. But you need to protect yourself. Based on what I'm finding, you could be exposed to serious financial and legal jeopardy if Amelia is knowingly participating in fraud or money laundering. The next morning, I sat in Camila Navarro's sleek downtown office. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with penetrating eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. Mr. Voff, she said after I'd explained the situation, what we're potentially looking at here is a complex scheme involving multiple types of fraud. If your wife is knowingly participating in a plan to launder money through this surrogacy arrangement, you could be implicated as her spouse. Amelia wouldn't knowingly commit fraud, I insisted, though my conviction was weakening by the hour. Camila's expression remained neutral. Regardless of intent, the consequences remain the same. I recommend immediate financial separation. We should file an emergency petition to freeze your joint assets and establish that you had no knowledge or participation in any potentially fraudulent activities. She slid a legal pad across her desk. Write down every detail you can remember about conversations related to this surrogacy, the money transfers, and any interactions with Jacob, Luna, or mentions of Ricardo Velasquez. As I left Camila's office with a folder of paperwork to complete, my phone buzzed with a call from Eric. Got something big, he said, his voice crackling with urgency. Meet me at Crawford Park in 30 minutes. Northwest corner. At the park, Eric was already waiting on a bench, sunglasses on despite the cloudy day. He handed me a coffee and spoke without making eye contact. The baby is a cover, he said quietly. I found emails between Jacob and Ricardo discussing a package delivery 9 months from now worth $500,000. What are you saying? I think they're using the surrogacy as a way to move money. Think about it, a large cash payment to Amelia that can be explained away as surrogacy compensation. A baby that gives them legitimate reason for Luna and Jacob to receive money from Ricardo. It's the perfect laundering setup. My coffee turned cold in my hand. But there will be an actual baby. The procedure is real. Eric nodded grimly. That's what makes it the perfect cover. No one questions money changing hands when there's a child involved. Does Luna know? Does Amelia? Can't say for sure about Amelia, but Luna definitely knows. He pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Luna's voice came through clearly. The surrogacy is just insurance. If Ricardo gets suspicious, we have a legitimate reason for all the transactions. Plus, Jacob and I get a kid out of it, which isn't the worst bonus. A woman's voice I didn't recognize responded, "Aren't you worried about your sister? She's taking all the risk here." Luna's laugh was cold. "Amelia has always done whatever I asked. She's so desperate for family approval, it's almost too easy." Eric stopped the recording. "My contact got this at their yoga studio." Luna didn't realize she was being recorded. I felt physically ill. "I need to get Amelia away from these people." "Careful," Eric warned. "If you tip them off that we know, it could get dangerous. These aren't people who leave loose ends." On the drive home, I tried calling Amelia repeatedly. No answer. When I arrived at our house, I found a moving van outside. Amelia and her mother were directing movers to load boxes into the truck. "What's going on?" I demanded. Amelia flinched at my voice but quickly composed herself. "I'm staying with my parents until you come to your senses about this surrogacy." Diana stepped between us. "She needs calm and support right now, Mason. Not your selfishness and accusations." "Did you know?" I asked Diana directly. "About Jacob's gambling? About Luna's affair with Ricardo Velasquez?" The flash of shock in her eyes told me everything. She hadn't known. Before she could recover, I turned to Amelia. "We need to talk. Privately. Now." 4 months passed like a blur. Autumn leaves gave way to winter snow, and I watched it all from the window of my new apartment. The divorce proceedings had begun, with Camila handling everything with ruthless efficiency. Meanwhile, Amelia's pregnancy progressed, her social media carefully documenting every milestone for Luna and Jacob's miracle baby. I hadn't spoken directly to Amelia since that day outside our house. She'd refused to listen, accused me of trying to sabotage her relationship with her sister, and climbed into her parents' car, leaving the movers to finish packing her things. All communication since then had been through lawyers. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Eric. "Jacob's gone," he said without preamble. "What do you mean gone?" "Disappeared 3 days ago. Didn't show up for work, hasn't been home. His car was found abandoned at the airport, but there's no record of him on any flights." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Have you told the police?" Luna did, but she waited almost 48 hours to report it. Said he often needed space, so she wasn't immediately concerned. His voice lowered. "My source says Jacob tried to run a scheme on Ricardo. Took money that was supposed to be laundered through a construction project and tried to disappear with it. And Ricardo found out? Looks that way." I thought of Amelia carrying a child at the center of this dangerous web. Does Luna know why he really disappeared? Hard to say. She's playing the concerned wife in public, but privately she's been making frantic calls to Ricardo. Draw your own conclusions. After hanging up, I debated my next move. I'd been keeping my distance, letting the legal process unfold, but this changed things. Amelia might be in danger now, whether she realized it or not. I was reaching for my coat when my phone rang again. Unknown number. Mason Voff. The voice was deep, accented. "We should talk about your wife's sister and her husband. The missing one." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm an interested party in their financial arrangements. Your wife is carrying something very valuable to me." "The baby has nothing to do with me," I said carefully. A dark chuckle. "We both know it's more than just a baby, Mr. Voff. Jacob made promises. Jacob took money. Now Jacob is gone, but his obligations remain. I'm not involved in any of this. But you've been asking questions. Having your detective friend poke around in my business." The voice hardened. "Perhaps you know where Jacob might have hidden my property?" "I have no idea where Jacob is or what he's done with your money. Money can be replaced. Trust cannot." Pause. "Tell Luna she has until the end of the month to return what Jacob took, or I'll be forced to consider the debt transferred to her." "And Mr. Voff?" "Stop investigating me." The line went dead. I immediately called Camila, who advised me to document the call and file a police report. "But be careful what you say," she warned. "Without proof, accusations against someone like Velasquez can backfire badly." That afternoon, I was reviewing blueprints for a new project when my receptionist buzzed me. "There's an Amelia Voff here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment but says it's urgent." I fought the urge to refuse. "Send her in." Amelia entered, her pregnancy now unmistakable beneath her winter coat. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "Everything's falling apart," she said without preamble, sinking into the chair across from my desk. "I heard about Jacob." She nodded miserably. "Luna's frantic. She says Jacob took money from their savings before he disappeared. A lot of money? Money that belonged to Ricardo Velasquez, perhaps?" I suggested. Her eyes widened. "How did you?" "I've been investigating for months, Amelia. I know about Jacob's gambling debts, Luna's affair with Ricardo, the money laundering scheme disguised as surrogacy." She shook her head vehemently. "No, that's not true. The surrogacy is real. Luna and Jacob want this baby. The baby is real. The motivations are not what you were told." I sighed. "Jacob is running from Ricardo, who is now threatening to hold Luna responsible for his debts. And by extension that puts you, and the baby you're carrying, in danger." Her hand moved protectively to her stomach. "That can't be right. Luna wouldn't." "Luna has been manipulating you your entire life," I said gently. "She knew you would agree to carry this child, just like you've agreed to everything else she's ever asked of you." Tears welled in her eyes. "What am I supposed to do? I'm 4 months pregnant with my sister's baby, except my sister isn't answering my calls half the time, and her husband has vanished. None of this was supposed to happen. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take her in my arms like I would have before. But too much had been broken. What did you expect to happen when you made life-altering decisions without me? When you chose your sister over our marriage? When you got involved with people like Ricardo Velasquez?" She looked up, confusion crossing her face. "Who is Ricardo Velasquez?" It was my turn to be surprised. "Luna's lover. Jacob's loan shark. The man behind this entire scheme. I've never heard that name before today. Luna said their fertility doctor was named Richard something, but Ricardo isn't a doctor. He's a criminal, and you've been pulled into his operation whether you realized it or not." As understanding dawned on Amelia's face, my phone rang. "Eric again. Turn on the news," he said tersely. "They just found Jacob's car at the bottom of Miller's Lake. No body yet, but there was blood on the driver's seat." Amelia's face drained of color as I repeated Eric's news about Jacob's car. She gripped the edge of my desk, knuckles white. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "Luna needs to know." "Luna probably already knows," I said more harshly than intended. "She's been lying to you from the beginning." Amelia's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Luna's name flashed on the screen. "Put it on speaker," I said quickly. "I need to hear this." Amelia hesitated, then nodded, answering the call. "Where are you?" Luna's voice was tight with panic. "I've been trying to reach you all day." "I'm with Mason," Amelia replied. "Luna, they found Jacob's car in Miller's Lake." "The police?" "I know about the car," Luna interrupted. "Listen to me carefully. Don't talk to the police. Don't tell them anything about the surrogacy, the money, none of it. Just say you haven't seen Jacob in days and know nothing." I raised an eyebrow at Amelia, who looked increasingly distressed. "Luna, what's going on? The truth, please." Pause. "This isn't a conversation for the phone. Meet me at Mom and Dad's in an hour." "I'll be there," Amelia said, ending the call. She looked at me, eyes wide with fear. What should I do? Part of me wanted to walk away, to let her face the consequences of her choices. But the larger part couldn't abandon her to people who had used and manipulated her. "We go together," I said firmly. "But first we call Detective Rodriguez." Eric had introduced me to Rodriguez weeks ago, a serious, methodical homicide detective who'd been quietly building a case against Ricardo Velasquez for months. I'd shared what information I could without directly implicating Amelia. Rodriguez arrived at my office within 20 minutes. He was a compact man with calculating eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Voff," he nodded to Amelia. "I understand you're in a difficult position, but I need to know everything about your arrangement with your sister and her husband." Amelia glanced at me uncertainly. "It's okay," I assured her. "Detective Rodriguez can help protect you and the baby." Over the next half hour, Amelia detailed everything: the initial surrogacy request, the surprising amount of money offered, the contract she'd signed, and Luna's increasingly erratic behavior over recent weeks. "Luna kept saying Jacob was under stress from work," Amelia explained. "But he'd call me sometimes asking if I'd seen Luna, saying she wasn't answering his calls. It seemed odd." "When was the last time you saw Jacob Winters?" Rodriguez asked. "About 2 weeks ago. He came to my parents' house looking for Luna. He seemed agitated, kept checking his phone. When Luna arrived, they argued in the driveway. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but she slapped him before they drove away separately. Rodriguez made notes. And your sister wants you to meet her at your parents' house now? Amelia nodded. We'll have officers nearby, Rodriguez said. Wear this. He produced a small recording device. It looks like a normal brooch. Just pin it to your coat. Amelia's hand trembled as she took it. You think Luna had something to do with Jacob's disappearance? Rodriguez's expression gave nothing away. I think everyone connected to Ricardo Velasquez is potentially both dangerous and in danger. As we prepared to leave, my phone rang. Eric again. Ricardo's men are looking for Luna, he said without preamble. My source says they're checking all her usual spots. They don't look happy. I relayed this to Rodriguez, who immediately called for additional backup. We need to move quickly, he said, checking his weapon. If Velasquez's people get to Luna before we do, things could get ugly. The drive to Amelia's parents' house was tense. Amelia stared out the window, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. I've been such a fool, she said quietly. I wanted so badly to help Luna that I ignored all the warning signs. Luna has manipulated you your entire life, I replied. She knew exactly which buttons to push. That doesn't excuse what I did to us. She turned to face me. I betrayed your trust, Mason. I made decisions that affected both our lives without consulting you. Even if everything else had been legitimate, that alone was unforgivable. I kept my eyes on the road, unable to look at her. Why did you do it? Really? She was silent for a long moment. Luna has always been the troubled one, the one who needed saving. I've spent my whole life trying to protect her, fix her problems. When she asked me to carry her baby, it felt like the ultimate way to help her. To finally give her stability. And the money didn't factor in? It was supposed to go toward the baby's future. A college fund. Her laugh was bitter. At least, that's what I told myself. We turned onto her parents' street, immediately spotting the police cars parked discreetly at both ends. Rodriguez had arrived ahead of us and was waiting in an unmarked vehicle. Remember, he said approaching our car, get Luna talking about Jacob and the money. We need her to incriminate herself on tape. Amelia nodded, her face pale but determined. And if Ricardo's men show up? We'll be watching the house. Any sign of trouble, we move in. He adjusted the recording device on her coat. Ready? As Amelia walked toward her parents' front door, I felt a surge of admiration for her courage, mingled with anger at the choices that had brought us here. Whatever happened next, our lives would never be the same. I watched from the unmarked police car as Amelia walked up the path to her parents' house. Every step seemed to take an eternity. Rodriguez sat beside me, his eyes never leaving her. Your wife is brave, he said quietly. Ex-wife. Almost. The correction came automatically, though it felt hollow. Whatever was happening between us legally, watching Amelia walk into danger made me realize I still cared deeply about her safety. Through the earpiece connected to Amelia's recording device, we heard the doorbell, followed by Robert's voice greeting his daughter. Diana's concerned questions about why Amelia looked so pale filtered through. Then Luna's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. We need to talk. Alone. The sisters moved to what must have been the study as the background noise diminished. Have you heard from Jacob? Amelia asked, following Rodriguez's instructions to get Luna talking immediately. Jacob's gone, Luna replied flatly. And we have bigger problems. Ricardo's men came looking for me this morning. Ricardo Velasquez? Amelia asked, feigning ignorance as instructed. Luna, what's really going on? The police found Jacob's car in Miller's Lake with blood inside. A sharp intake of breath. Did they find him? No. Luna, please tell me you didn't have anything to do with this. Don't be ridiculous, Luna snapped. Jacob got himself into this mess. He took money from Ricardo, a lot of money, and tried to run. What money? I thought Ricardo was investing in Jacob's business. Luna's laugh was harsh. There is no business, Amelia. There never was. Ricardo needed to move money, clean it. Jacob offered to help in exchange for clearing his gambling debts. But then the idiot got greedy. Rodriguez nodded approvingly at the clear admission we were hearing. And the baby? Amelia's voice wavered. Was that part of the money laundering too? A moment of silence. It wasn't supposed to be. That was separate at first. But when Ricardo found out I was using you as a surrogate, he saw an opportunity. A baby creates a paper trail of legitimate expenses, reasons for money to change hands. You used me, Amelia said, her voice breaking. You used me to help launder money for a criminal. I needed a way out. Luna hissed. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to Jacob? The debts, the lies, the constant fear of who might show up at our door demanding payment? Ricardo was my ticket out. You're having an affair with him, Amelia stated, not asked. Another pause. How did you know? Mason's been investigating. He knows everything, Luna. About Ricardo, about the money laundering, about Jacob's gambling. Mason, Luna spat the name. Of course he couldn't mind his own business. Well, it doesn't matter now. We need to fix this. Fix it how? Jacob is missing, possibly dead. Ricardo's men are looking for you. The police are investigating. What exactly is your plan here? I heard movement, then Luna's voice dropped to a whisper. Listen to me very carefully. The money Jacob took is in a storage unit on Westfield Road. I need you to get it for me. Me? Why would I? Because you're the only one Ricardo's men aren't watching. They don't see you as part of this. Plus, you're pregnant. No one suspects a pregnant woman. Rodriguez was already speaking into his radio, dispatching officers to the storage facility. I can't believe you're asking me this, Amelia said, her voice steadier now. You want me to risk my life, and your baby's life, to fix your criminal mess? It's not just my mess anymore. Luna's control finally broke. You took the money too, remember? $50,000 for being a surrogate. Where do you think that came from? Ricardo's dirty money that needed cleaning. You're already involved. Through the earpiece, I heard Amelia take a deep breath. I'm recording this conversation, Luna. The police are outside. Sounds of struggle erupted, then Diana's voice called out in alarm. Rodriguez signaled, and officers converged on the house from all directions. I jumped out of the car, ignoring Rodriguez's order to stay put. By the time I reached the door, officers were already inside. In the study, Luna was being handcuffed while Diana sobbed in Robert's arms. Amelia stood against the wall, a red mark blooming on her cheek. She tried to run, Amelia explained as I approached. Hit me when I blocked the door. An officer led Luna past us. She stopped, eyes burning with hatred. This is your fault, she spat at me. You turned her against her own family. You did that yourself, I replied calmly, when you decided to use her as a pawn in your criminal activities. As Luna was placed in a police car, Rodriguez approached us. We've got units heading to the storage facility now. Mrs. Voff, we'll need you to come to the station to make a formal statement. Amelia nodded, then suddenly clutched her stomach, face contorting in pain. What's wrong? I asked, alarm surging through me. I don't know, something doesn't feel right, she gasped. The baby? Rodriguez immediately called for an ambulance while I helped Amelia to a chair. Diana rushed over, momentarily setting aside her shock at Luna's arrest. How far along are you? Rodriguez asked. Almost 5 months, Amelia managed between shallow breaths. The paramedics arrived within minutes, quickly assessing Amelia before loading her onto a stretcher. Without thinking, I climbed into the ambulance beside her. As we pulled away, I saw Ricardo Velasquez being led out of a black SUV in handcuffs, his face a mask of cold fury. Rodriguez had coordinated multiple arrests simultaneously. Mason, Amelia whispered, gripping my hand. I'm so sorry. For everything. I squeezed her hand in return, uncertain what our future held but knowing that, at least for now, I wouldn't leave her to face this alone. The hospital waiting room felt like limbo, a sterile purgatory where time stretched endlessly. I paced the length of the room, checking the clock every few minutes though it seemed frozen in place. When the doctor finally emerged, her face revealed nothing. Mr. Voff? Your wife is stable. Ex-wife, I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. How is she? And the baby? Mrs. Voff experienced what we call a threatened miscarriage. The stress likely triggered some uterine contractions, but we've managed to stop them. Both she and the fetus are stable for now, but she'll need to remain on bed rest for at least 2 weeks. Relief washed over me. Despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of Amelia suffering through a miscarriage on top of everything else. Can I see her? The doctor nodded. She's asking for you. Room 312. Amelia looked small in the hospital bed, monitors beeping steadily beside her. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach, her eyes fixed on the ceiling until she heard my footsteps. The baby's okay, she said immediately, her voice hoarse. They said the heartbeat is strong. I pulled a chair next to her bed. The doctor told me. You need to rest. Mason. She hesitated. You don't have to stay. I know this isn't your responsibility. Let's not worry about that right now, I said gently. Rodriguez called. They found the money in the storage unit just where Luna said it would be. Nearly $500,000. Amelia closed her eyes briefly. Did they find Jacob? Not yet. But with Ricardo and Luna both in custody, it's only a matter of time before the full story comes out. A nurse interrupted, bringing in a tray with water and medication. After she left, Amelia turned to me with frightened eyes. What happens now? To the baby, I mean. Luna's going to prison, Jacob is missing, or worse? It was the question I'd been avoiding. The child Amelia carried was legally meant for Luna and Jacob, but with both potential parents facing criminal charges, the situation had become impossibly complicated. I don't know, I admitted. There will probably be custody hearings, involvement from social services. Social services? Alarm flashed across her face. You mean they might take the baby away? It's possible. The biological parents are under investigation for serious crimes. Amelia's monitor beeped faster as her pulse increased. But I'm the biological mother too. Doesn't that count for anything? Legally, you signed away your parental rights in the surrogacy agreement, I reminded her gently. Though given the circumstances, a judge might reconsider. Tears welled in her eyes. This poor innocent child caught in the middle of all this mess. My phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. DNA results in. Jacob not the biological father. Matches to Ricardo Velasquez. Call me. I stared at the message, the implications sinking in. Luna had used her husband's sperm for the IVF procedure. She'd used Ricardo's instead. Whether Jacob had known was unclear, but it added yet another layer to the deception. What is it? Amelia asked, noticing my expression. I debated whether to tell her, concerned about causing more stress. But she deserved the truth. The baby's biological father is Ricardo Velasquez, not Jacob. Her face paled. That's not possible. The fertility clinic used Jacob's. They showed me the paperwork. Paperwork can be forged. My guess is Luna arranged it somehow. She was planning to leave Jacob for Ricardo all along. Amelia turned away, shoulders shaking as she wept silently. I sat beside her, not touching her but offering my presence until she composed herself. 3 years, she said finally. What? My lawyer called before you arrived. The DA is offering a plea deal. 3 years probation in exchange for testimony against Luna and Ricardo. No jail time, but I'll have a felony record for conspiracy to commit fraud. The news was better than I'd feared. That's good, Amelia. You could have faced serious prison time. But what about the baby? She whispered. A child with a convicted felon for a biological mother and an organized crime figure for a father? What chance does this innocent life have? I had no answer. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily on both of us. A knock at the door interrupted our silence. Robert and Diana entered cautiously, both looking years older than they had just days ago. We've just come from seeing Luna at the detention center, Robert said, his voice hollow. She's not well. Diana clutched a tissue, eyes red-rimmed. She told us she can't take responsibility for the baby. Not now, maybe not ever. Amelia's hand tightened around the blanket. What are you saying? We're saying, Robert continued hesitantly, that we're too old to raise another child. We can't take on an infant at our age, especially given the circumstances. The unspoken question hung in the air. What would happen to this child once born? As if summoned by the question, my phone rang, my sister Olivia calling from Seattle. I excused myself to take the call in the hallway. I saw the news, Olivia said immediately. Ricardo Velasquez arrested in money laundering scheme. Isn't that the case you've been involved with? Are you okay? It's complicated, I replied, lowering my voice. Amelia's in the hospital. She's carrying a baby as a surrogate for her sister, who turns out to be involved in all this criminal activity. Oh my God, Mason. That's awful. What's going to happen to the baby? I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. Nobody seems to want it now that the truth has come out. It's just an innocent victim in all this. There was a pause before Olivia spoke again. What if I took the baby? Just temporarily until things settled down? Her offer caught me completely off guard. You'd do that. Family helps family, Mason. Even family by marriage. And an innocent child shouldn't suffer for the sins of the parents. As I walked back into Amelia's room, I carried with me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in months. 2 years later, I stood at the window of my downtown office, watching the spring rain wash the city clean. So much had changed since those dark days when my life had splintered apart. My architectural firm had not only survived but thrived, with 3 major projects completed and a prestigious international award adding credibility to our portfolio. The phone on my desk buzzed. "Mr. Voff, your 2 o'clock is here. Send her in, please." I turned from the window as the door opened. Amelia looked different now, her hair shorter, her posture more confident, though a certain sadness lingered in her eyes. The kind that comes from hard-won wisdom. "Nice view," she remarked, glancing at the cityscape beyond the glass. "The company's doing well," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Can I get you anything? Coffee?" "No, thank you." She sat down, setting her purse carefully beside her. "I appreciate you meeting with me." A slightly awkward silence fell between us. We hadn't spoken in months, not since finalizing the divorce. Our last interaction had been at Thomas's second birthday party at my sister's house. A civil but distant exchange. "How's the rehabilitation program going?" I asked, knowing she had been working with a support group for women manipulated into criminal activities by partners or family members. "It's good. I'm now leading sessions for newcomers." A small smile crossed her face. "Turns out my experience is unfortunately relatable for many women." I nodded, genuinely pleased for her. "And your probation?" "1 more year. My officer says I'm a model case." She adjusted her sleeve. "The gallery rehired me part-time. Apparently being the sister of a notorious criminal gives me an interesting perspective on provocative art." I smiled at her attempt at humor. "I'm glad things are looking up." She met my eyes directly. "I didn't come here just to catch up, Mason. I came to thank you properly." "For what?" "For saving Thomas." She spoke the name with such tenderness that it caught me off guard. "For arranging for Olivia to take him when nobody else would. For making sure he had a stable home while I served my probation. He's an innocent child. He deserved better than to become a ward of the state because of what Luna and Ricardo did." "Still," she insisted, "many men would have washed their hands of the whole situation. Would have let their anger at their ex-wife color their actions toward a child that wasn't even theirs." Her voice softened. "But you didn't. You protected him. You still visit him." I shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. "He's my nephew in a way. Olivia and Mark love him like their own." "I know." She paused. "Have you heard the latest about Luna?" I nodded. 5 years for fraud and money laundering. She'll be up for parole next year, though I doubt she'll get it. "And Ricardo got 15 years, Amelia added. "The prosecutor said his organization has been completely dismantled. Jacob's fate had been determined months ago, when his body was finally recovered from a remote area outside the city. The coroner had ruled it a homicide, with Ricardo's lieutenant eventually confessing to the killing in exchange for a reduced sentence." "What about Jacob's immunity deal?" Amelia asked. "I heard he was supposed to testify against Ricardo before he..." "Turned out he'd already begun cooperating with the FBI, I explained. "That's why Ricardo had him killed. The immunity deal died with him." Amelia stared down at her hands. "I made so many terrible choices, Mason. My selfishness, my greed, my need to please Luna, it cost me everything that mattered." "You were manipulated by experts," I said gently. "Luna knew exactly which buttons to push. Ricardo had been running these schemes for years. That doesn't excuse the fact that I betrayed you." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I should have trusted you. Should have talked to you before making any decisions. Our marriage deserved that basic respect." I couldn't disagree. "Yes, it did." "I heard you're seeing someone," she said, changing the subject. "An architect?" I smiled, thinking of Naomi. "Yes, Naomi Chin. We've been together about a year now." "Is it serious?" "We're talking about moving in together." Amelia nodded, a genuine smile crossing her face. "I'm happy for you, Mason. Truly. You deserve someone who shares your values. Your principles." The word hung between us, loaded with meaning. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Standing your ground even when it would have been easier to give in? Even when it cost you your marriage?" I considered her question carefully. "No. If I had compromised then, we might both be in prison now. Or worse." I leaned forward. "Principles aren't just abstract ideals, Amelia. They're the guardrails that keep us from driving off cliffs we don't see coming." She absorbed this with a thoughtful expression. "I've learned that lesson the hard way." As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Olivia mentioned you're coming to Thomas's play group on Sunday." "I try to visit every other weekend," I confirmed. "He's getting so big now." "He calls you Uncle Mason," she said softly. "When I visit, he talks about you constantly." The thought warmed me unexpectedly. Though Thomas had been conceived in deception, he was an innocent, a bright, curious child who loved dinosaurs and building blocks. "I'll see you there then," I said. After Amelia left, I returned to the window, watching her cross the street below. Our paths had diverged, our marriage dissolved, but something unexpected had emerged from the wreckage. A different kind of family. Not what either of us had planned, but perhaps what that innocent child needed. On my desk sat a framed photograph, Olivia and Mark with little Thomas between them, his smile wide and trusting. Next to it, a child's drawing, stick figures labeled Aunt Liv, Uncle Mark, Uncle Mason, and Mommy. Different from the family I had once envisioned with Amelia, but a family nonetheless. Sometimes strength lies not just in standing firm for your principles, but in finding the grace to forgive without forgetting to protect yourself. I had done both and somehow found peace along the way.